Welcome back, everyone. So now we're going to talk about startups and risk management. Do startups need risk management? Can they benefit from risk management? I mean, we've already talked previously about COVID. We've talked about what risk management is, opportunities, the upside of risk. So it's clear it can help. But I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about startups and risk management to really properly understand and define why they need risk management, how risk management can support. We're also going to go into a lot more detail about strategy and risk, because strategy and risk go hand in hand. You heard from the definition of risk that it's all about objectives. So we're going to continue down that path. I gave you an example in COVID whereby we talked about strategy and risks working together. I'm going to go into a bit more detail and show you a little bit more in practice how that would work and how you can actually develop several strategies in order to prepare better. So startups and risk management. These are the topics we're going to cover. Do startups need risk management? What is the benefit of good risk management? Risk-based planning and strategies, that's where I mentioned we're going to go into a little bit more detail. The link between risk, innovation, and opportunity. This is an important part. We talked briefly about it in terms of innovation as well when I was talking about COVID and how space travel really helped with solar panel use. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that and then look at examples of startups thriving because of risk management. We'll actually use some real examples. So let's get into it. I want you to imagine Formula One. The race cars in Formula One, they drive extremely fast. And we have Ferrari who spend a lot of money on their brakes in innovation and spending a lot of money on their braking system. The question I have is, why do Ferrari spend so much money on their brakes? And I'd like you to think about that for a little while. Why does Ferrari spend so much money on their brakes? Now, what you will probably be thinking is, and it's normal and it's correct, brakes are there to help us stop. They help us slow down and they help us avoid accidents. They help us to avoid damaging our vehicle. So we've just saved money because we haven't damaged our vehicle. We've just saved money because we haven't had a driver get seriously injured. But we've also protected our reputation and our sponsorship because we haven't had a crash. We've also protected our reputation in terms of being safe, so our drivers are safe. So we can see that by putting good brakes and spending money on good brakes in the vehicle, we're able to control the car better, avoid accidents, save money, and protect our reputation. But it's not just for slowing down. Let's talk a little bit about what I just mentioned about control. If the driver has control, can slow down anytime he wants, can avoid accidents, knows that he isn't going to have an accident, probably the knock-on effect, and by the way, this goes back to my point previously about human factors, probably the impact it will have on the driver is confidence. What does a confident driver have that the non-confident driver doesn't? Winning mentality. The confident driver will win the race. Additionally, with the right brakes, you can brake at the last minute, overtake quicker, win the race. The brakes are in place to go faster. They're not there to stop us. Risk management is the brake in this instance. Yes, it will, risk management helps with safety. It will help protect your finances. It'll help protect your reputation, but it will help you with the right risk. Taking the right risk, it will help you win the race. That's how I compare brakes to risk management. And the Ferrari is our organization. We want to win the race, so we have risk management there to support us in terms of defense, but also offense. It's not there to slow us down. It's not there to stop us from doing anything. It is here to help us win the race. So why else? 50% of small businesses will fail within the first 5 years, often because of their approach to business risk. They don't know the risk they're taking. They're taking too much risk. Now, startups must take risk. That's the whole point of a startup. You are going to be taking risk. Take the right risk, understand your risks. If we look at the organizational life cycle, if you are a startup, it will look very different to your competitors who are maybe mature. A startup has to take risk. They're entering into an existing market and they're trying to shake things up. That is risk taking. A mature organization tries to safeguard where they already are. They're going to take less risk. So it's important to understand that we are a startup, we are going to take more risk, so we better manage our risk more efficiently. And what are we trying to achieve when managing risk? What's the purpose of risk management? Again, it depends on your organization. It depends why we're doing risk management. Is it to make better decision making? Is it to keep within risk appetite limits? For example, I have a client that's in the Middle East. Their profit margins are extremely tight. Any change in environment will cause them to start losing money. So they are very risk averse. In other words, they don't like taking risks. So they have set risk limits. So their risk management program is there to make sure that they stay within their limits. Other organizations that I've worked with are all about taking risk. Tech companies who want to take a lot of risk because they want to try something different. So we need to understand why. Is it to get a higher return on investment? Is it to increase confidence, either confidence in shareholders or investors, or indeed confidence within our own company? Is it to protect our reputation? Again, I've worked with companies that their whole point of being is reputation. They're building a brand. They don't care about the money. They've got unlimited money. They're caring about their reputation. So now we focus on that. It's important to understand why are we looking at risk management. And if we look at business startup stages, you've got your formation where you set up your objectives and strategy, you validating where you have your lean startup, and then you've growth where you're scaling up, and risk management forms a part of all aspects of that. When you're starting up and looking at objectives, that's when you do risk management. What are our objectives? What is our strategy? And what are the risks to achieving those? When we're adapting, when we're winning new business, what is the risks attached to that? And when we're growing and scaling up, what are the risks attached to that? New risks, different risk appetites. Things will change over time, and risk management changes with that. Shareholder value of risk management, a survey of 137 institutional investors. This was a global risk survey by Ernst & Young. They looked at the largest funds, and the following question was asked. Was it worth paying a premium for companies that can demonstrate a successful approach to risk management? And as you can see, most strongly agreed, as well as agreed somewhat with this. Very few disagreed. So in other words, people are willing to invest and support organizations that are doing risk management in the right way. So let's look at the benefits of good risk management. We talked about, do startups need risk management? What about the benefits of good risk management? If we look at a scale, on the right side, we have regulatory requirements and corporate governance. These are why we must do risk management. There might be requirements by the government, there might be regulatory requirements, and that's great. But that's not really adding the biggest amount of value. The value is better management. The value is improved business planning. Better management because you understand your risks, so you can make better management decisions. Improved business planning because your business plans are now risk focused. They consider risks in your business planning. Focus on financial priorities and exceeding objectives. We don't just look to meet our objectives. With risk management, there's potential to exceed those objectives. We can demonstrate improvement year on year in terms of how we've reduced our risk. Better option appraisal. We understand our options when we understand our risks. But what's interesting, and my favorite, is less risk averse. If we understand our risks, we will take more risk, or at least proper risk. We will be able to take the right type of risk. And that's what we're trying to achieve. We want to take risk, the right type of risk. It allows us to increase our range of opportunities. It allows us to identify and manage risk across our organization. As we grow, this will become more important. Top management at the start might be close to the ground, but as you grow, as you become more successful, you will drift away from the ground. You need to understand the risks on the ground. Reduce negative surprises, major incidents, and increasing gains. Reducing performance variability. Variability comes from uncertainty and risk. If you can try to identify risk and manage risk, uncertainty closes a little bit, variability closes a little bit, and you become more efficient and effective. It helps you improve resource deployment as well. That's the value of enterprise risk management. And I'm going to give you an example as well. Picture this. So I've given you the example of how companies can become less risk averse. In other words, they don't shy away from risk. They want to take risk. And I'm going to give you an example. I have a cup here. And in this cup, this is an organization, organization A. In this cup is liquid. I'm not going to tell you how much, but liquid is risk in this case, in this example. So let's imagine now, company A has risk, like every company. How much more risk can I take as the CEO? If I want to take risk, how much more risk can I put in here? How much more liquid can I put in here? We don't know. The risk might be up to here, in which case we can only take a little bit more risk. But if we don't know and we start taking risk, we might overflow. What happens if we overflow? We've just gone out of business. Or we only have this much risk, but we're too scared to take more risk in case we overflow. So we don't take risk. We could have taken this much more risk, but we didn't. We stayed here. So we're not taking enough risk because company B do risk management. And that's the difference. Company A did not do risk management. Company B does risk management. Do you see the difference here? You can see how much risk is in this company. Therefore, if you know how much risk you already have, you can say, okay, I want to take this much more risk. You're much more efficient and effective than company A. You know how much risk you have, and you know if you can take more and if you want to take more. You can avoid overflowing, so you're not going to go out of business, but you can also afford to take a little bit more risk if you see a major opportunity. And guess what? If you manage to manage some of your risks down, wow, I can take even more risk now. And that is why risk management is so valuable to startups. Startups need to take risk. Do you know how much risk you can take? Do you know how much risk you have at the moment? And I'm not just talking about the financial risks, all the risks. This is where ERM gives competitive advantage. It's how ERM helps you become the Ferrari that wins the race. Okay, and we're going to talk now about a risk-based planning and strategy approach. So risk-based planning and strategies, what do we mean by that? Well, I mentioned before that risk management is in place to stop risks from happening and prepare for major events that may occur. In other words, you identify risk, as you've seen in the previous sections. You assess them. You then put in place mitigating actions to try to stop them from happening or to reduce the impact. But if the risks happen, we then have business continuity, whether it's pandemic plans, crisis communication, business continuity, or insurance, for example. And here's emergency response, where you immediately respond to something by saving lives, getting people out, evacuating, putting out the fire. Then you have crisis management and communication plan. That's where the top management get together to discuss, what are we going to do? Who should we contact? And then you have the business recovery, which is the business continuity plans, which is how do we get back to normal as fast as possible? So that is risk management in a nutshell. So what sort of organization do you work for or with, or what sort of organization are you? This will determine what type of risk management you actually need. If you remember back a few slides, I mentioned that, why are we doing risk management? This will help you understand what type of risk management you need. So why risk-based strategy? I touched on it during COVID in the section about COVID. We need to consider that there may be more lockdowns. There may be social distancing that may impact your business model. There may be an economic downturn in the future or canceled events that you're relying on. There are a lot of businesses that rely specifically on major events that are coming. Their whole business plan over 2 or 3 years is all about this major project or this major event that is about to happen. What happens if it doesn't happen? Are you prepared to adjust for that? Are you going to survive? What happens if there's more expensive flights or less flight traffic? What happens if less people come to your city than expected? And that's part of your business model. It's all about what is your business model and your objectives, and how can we have a risk-based plan that considers all risks that could happen so that we are agile enough and sophisticated enough and have a positive enough culture to adapt and thrive. As you remember, we've covered this. Risk management and strategic planning should be working together. They go hand in hand to deal with the solutions to risks to the business, opportunity assessments, risks to the strategy itself, and do quantification, quantitative risk analysis. We're going to look at all of these a little bit individually now and go in a little bit more detail than we have done previously. So preparing for a post-COVID world, there's a number of things we need to do. Now, it's important to note, although I'm talking about a post-COVID world, it doesn't, even if COVID had not happened, we should be doing this because the world constantly changes. We need to run scenario workshops, understand what future scenarios might there be. COVID just happens to be the thing that's happening at the moment that is going to change the world in the way we do things. But even if COVID wasn't here, we would still be changing, whether it's climate change, whether it's something else. Robotics, AI, the future will be different. And we need scenario workshops to identify how different. This goes hand in hand with horizon scanning. We'll go into detail to discuss these. We need to identify opportunities for our business to grow, review risks to propose strategies, and provide insight into potential success. In other words, we have a plan. What is the potential deviation to success of our proposed strategies? Deviation in terms of, with various risks happening, how exposed are we to our objectives? So, number one, in order to build plans that are sustainable and risk-based, identify critical uncertainties. Where are we now? What can we expect things to look like? Let's question things. What if there's less travel? What if there's continued social distancing? What if there's less youth unemployment? Now, notice I say less youth unemployment. What I'm saying here is there are more youth employed than elderly, because we know that the elderly are more vulnerable to COVID. So maybe people are going to start recruiting youth. So we need to think about that. How does that affect our business model? More youth unemployment as a result of the recession. So maybe it's the opposite. Maybe there's more youth unemployment because companies want experience. More home working. Is this going to continue? Shift in the economic or social structure of our country. How is that going to affect our business model? Adoption of technology. What happens when robotics become the norm? Are we going to be left behind or ahead of the game? AI. Are we investing in AI now? Does it help our business? Maybe, maybe not. But we need to ask those questions. What about a reorganization of supply chain? So COVID has impacted supply chain, but we've also seen trade wars. So never mind COVID now. We've seen trade wars between China and the USA. We've seen trade wars elsewhere. We've seen tariffs starting to be introduced. We've seen increased competition from other countries. What happens if your country decides that maybe we're going to put in regulation that we will not trade with certain countries, and that is actually part of your supply chain? Are you ready for that? I worked in Iraq for a while, and we had a lot of suppliers from China, and we had suppliers from Turkey that would work in country. Halfway through our mega project, the Iraqi government decided we don't want to work anymore with the Chinese. This meant we had to find alternative sources. Luckily, we had actually prepared for that. So although it delayed us and it cost us a lot more, it would have been much worse if we hadn't prepared. The Turkish contractors, overnight, the Iraqis decided, no, Turkish aren't welcome here. We're canceling all visas. Again, we had a workaround for that because we had pre-prepared in the event that this might happen. We had even considered, what are we going to do if one of our key contractors, who is from South Korea, are recalled back to the country because North Korea and South Korean relations start getting even worse. It doesn't have to be a war. As long as it hits a certain level, they will recall all male South Koreans to come back to their country and basically bear arms and prepare. So we had to think about these kind of things. So what happens if there's a reorganization of the supply chain? What if the public demand better preparedness? Are you prepared if your customers and clients say, what are your business continuity plans? Or what do you do in terms of risk management? Because more and more people are beginning to ask that question. The governments, if you work with governments, they're starting to implement this. Anyone that does deals with the government better have risk management and business continuity. But even if they're not asking that question, in the future, this might be a competitive advantage. What if your competitors don't have risk management or business continuity, but you do? I can tell you, I've worked with several organizations. When it came down to it and the price was very similar, we chose the company that had risk management and business continuity arrangements. Added value, competitive advantage. What happens if the government or your bank starts asking you to set aside a fund or contingency in preparation for another disaster? This might be a requirement. Are you ready? Do you have that? Do you have that contingency? These are the kind of questions, uncertainties that we need to start looking at. Once we've done that, we can start developing scenarios. And scenarios, you could use all sorts of things. So on this side, we have the economy, and on the top, we've got social trust. But these could equally be talent availability, technology adoption, oil price, demand, property sales. If you're in a USA, Democrat versus Republican government, Brexit deals, if you're in the UK, China trade, it could be anything. So let's look at social trust and economy. Remember, we're developing scenarios. When social trust is high and the economic situation rebounds nicely after COVID, we have science and tech-driven society. The virus is well controlled, the economy is strong, people crave human interaction again, companies are more efficient and tech-enabled. Let's take the opposite, where there's a prolonged recession and social trust is low. We might see prolonged recession, fear of virus coming back, nationalistic policies, industries consolidate, companies struggle for trust. There's a digital divide grows, massive unemployment, loss of trust in the government, tribalism and increased crime. Two very different scenarios, but on different scales of the same. Social trust and economy. Assuming social trust and economy is important to you. If it's not, that's fine. Find something that is important to you, build your scenarios around that. What is going to impact our business? What is our vulnerabilities? And then we build these worlds of what the future looks like. That's your scenario planning. So now we have our scenarios and we do some horizon scanning, and horizon scanning is essentially looking into the future. What's going to happen in the next sort of 10 or 15 years? Climate change, for example. If you were a car company 5-10 years ago, you should have been doing horizon scanning and saying, okay, we know, for example, that climate change is happening and people are focusing on this. We sell cars that are dirty. Do you think in the future something might change? The trends indicate that people are getting more conscious. In the future, what happens if people stop buying our cars because of the fact that they are worrying about the environment? What can we do differently? Let's invest in electric. The companies that invested in electric 10 years ago are way ahead of the car companies that are now moving to electric. Why? Because it's not as easy as saying we're now going to make electric cars. You need to change your whole infrastructure, your factory. It costs a lot of money to change all of that. You need to find resources and suppliers. who are probably already supplying the other car companies, and now they can charge you more because they haven't got long-term deals. Get in there early, understand what the horizon is looking like. Tech-driven horizon scanning. Look at BlackBerry. I usually ask the question, who here owns a BlackBerry phone? And no one raises their hand. I say, who here owned a BlackBerry phone in the last 10, 15 years? Everyone raises their hand. What happened in 10, 15 years that now suddenly no one owns a BlackBerry? Well, 10 years ago, or whenever it was, Apple introduced, and by the way, BlackBerry owned the market, and Apple introduced touchscreen technology. It would have been much longer than that. I'm showing my age. It was a long time ago that they came up with the first iPhone. But you get my point. They came up with touchscreen. BlackBerry looked at this technology and said, technology isn't there yet. Sony Ericsson are doing it and it's rubbish. And to be fair, I actually bought a Sony Ericsson touchscreen phone. I wanted to be ahead of the game and I was very disappointed. So when Apple came out with one, I was the same. I thought, I'm not too interested. I'll stick with the one I have and eventually I'll change phones. I don't like this touchscreen. It'll never catch on. No one will buy a touchscreen phone. That's what BlackBerry thought as well. People like the physical keys. That's what they said. They didn't. BlackBerry are basically out of business and Apple own the market, along with Samsung. Touchscreen phones own the market. They should have been looking into the future much earlier and preparing. Another example, Kodak. This is a good one. And I'll get to Kodak in a minute. In another section, we'll talk about Kodak and why they didn't go forward with their technology. But the point is, you look at these scenarios, you do horizon scanning, and then you basically do a joint risk and strategy development of your strategic plan options. You might have several options for you, for your company, in terms of what is our strategy going to be. And by the end of it, you can build a robust risk-based strategy that has considered all the risks, all the scenarios, that knows it can survive those risks and scenarios. So there's several options here. You can develop one strategy or several strategies. If you develop several strategies, you might be able to transition to each one depending on the scenario. I have this strategy, this is our focus, but if the worst happens, one of these major risks happen, or this scenario occurs, we can easily transition to our other strategic plan that will also see us be successful. Or you develop one strategy that covers all the scenarios that you've built. It might not be that easy to build a scenario or a strategy like that, but it's possible, especially if you stress test it. And by stress testing, I mean doing quantitative risk analysis. If you decide on choosing just one strategy, you can develop several strategies, run risk-based analysis to determine the likelihood of success of those strategies. So now you are taking the risk information and the strategy, running stress testing or quantitative risk analysis to see which one of these strategies will be most successful when we consider all the risks. So strategy A might give you the best return, but if it's not going to be able to withstand many stresses, many scenarios, maybe that's not the option we should go for. We should go with strategy B, which, okay, it's not as good as strategy A, it's still good, but it's so much more agile and resilient to changes in our external environment and any major crisis that might occur. Let's do that. Because remember, if we understand the risks, they help us understand our constraints and boundaries, and we can build better plans. So what is the link then between risk, innovation, and opportunity? Again, we touched upon it in COVID. We're just going to go a little bit more in depth with some examples. What happens when all your risks are in the green zone? This is your typical risk matrix, as you saw when you assess your risks, likelihood, and impact. What happens when we manage to manage all our risks down into the green zone? Good, right? Because everything's green and nice. No. If you're all in the green, you're not taking enough risk. If you're all in the green, your water bottle that I showed you earlier is not half, it's going to be much further down. Sorry, there was a little bit of a problem here. I'm going to stop sharing and show you again. Your water bottle that I showed you earlier is very, very light here. You're not taking enough risk. If all your risks are in the green zone, you've managed them all down. I'm swallowing, I'm managing the risks. Now, I'm hardly taking any risk. That's not a good place to be in. We want to take risk. So, what happens when all our risks are in the green zone? We are not taking enough risk. We might go out of business, or worse, our competitors are taking risk and will basically completely destroy us. Kodak and BlackBerry. I gave you the BlackBerry example, but Kodak is an even better example. Kodak invented the digital technology for digital cameras. Invented it. They were so scared of taking risk that it would impact their core business, which was the physical camera, that they didn't take the risk of actually going for it and trying digital cameras and making it a core part of their strategy. You know who did? Every other camera company. You know the difference between every other camera company and Kodak? Every other camera company is still around today. Kodak is not. That's the difference. Taking risk. We don't want to be in the green. We want a nice mix. We want to build that into our strategy. Those who do not understand the risk or miscalculate the risks stand to be exploited by those who understand them better. Competitive advantage, taking the right risks, beating the competition, being the Ferrari. I mentioned 10x before. 10 times. You want to think 10 times bigger. That's what Google do. They don't want 10% improvement. They want the NASA style, going out into space, challenging the norm, finding those constraints, doing things differently, thinking 10 times bigger. When you think 10 times bigger, you realize the constraints that you are under. You don't try to improve something incrementally. You go big, you come up with new technology. Innovate. Risk management drives innovation. And by the way, percent of the time Google employees can spend working on ideas that they generate or that they interests them is 20%. And the percent of Google's products that originated from the 20% time is 50%. Innovation, thinking differently. Richard Branson says, unless you risk something, the world stands still. Nothing changes if we don't take risk. In the early days, this is what flight looked like. It was falling apart. There was accidents. Test pilots were dying. But guess what? Should we have stopped? Should we have said, oh, that's too risky, we mustn't take risk? No. We had to improve. We drove to improve the quality of what we were building. Test pilots understood the risks they were taking. There was a nice insurance program so that if a test pilot did pass doing something they loved, their family were well taken care of. So everyone understood the risks, and eventually we now have airplanes. This would have been much more effective a year ago without COVID, when I could say, and I could have flown to see you all physically and given this training, but unfortunately I can't. Most of the planes are grounded. Nonetheless, the technology is amazing. And if it wasn't for these struggles and taking the risk, we would never be here. Same with space travel. Challenger exploded, NASA's Challenger. Did they stop? No, they understand the risks, they improve. Sir Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic, they had a major accident where a spaceship exploded in one of their test trials. He came afterwards and he said, listen, I take risks seriously. We take everything seriously. This is a terrible event. However, we must continue, and we will continue to check that we are safe as possible, but we are striving to do something different. And people understand that. And thanks to space travel, thanks to this pushing the boundaries, SpaceX, Elon Musk's SpaceX, have got all these booster rockets now landing and reusable. This is an example of 10 times innovation. On Earth, we don't have to reuse rockets, but this will eventually become useful for stuff on Earth as well. We even have a car in space. I don't know if that's anything positive, but it's interesting. Elon Musk sends into space one of his Teslas. I don't know that that's helping mankind, but the point is we're doing things differently, but we've done it through risk management. And again, just to give you an example of why space travel has helped innovation. These risks in space travel have seen, as I mentioned, solar panels, but they've also seen prosthetic limbs. They've seen technologies such as the hearts, the temporary hearts, mechanical hearts that you put in to transplant patients that will act as a heart until they can get a new heart. There is so many technologies that have been invented or developed through space travel because there's constraints up there that you don't get down on Earth. We need to think the same way down on Earth, and risk management can help us think that way. It's about managing our opportunity and threat, taking the right amount of risk, balancing it. So one way we should be looking at developing our strategy is also looking at our organization, looking at all the things that make our organization and source what we source for our organization, from the planet to resources and suppliers, as well as the output from clients, consumers, and people. Look at these. Are there any vulnerabilities to our organization? If you can find vulnerabilities, you know that this is a good starting point to start looking at risks. Do we have partners? Do we have JVs? Are we comfortable with our partners? Do they have the skill set? Are they doing risk management? What about our competitors? What are they doing, and new entrants? What about counterparts? What about our banks? What about the loans we have? We need to look at the full environment and understand our vulnerabilities. Another example, I keep going back to space travel. There's a good film, again, I'm showing my age a little bit here. I remember when Apollo 13 came out with Tom Hanks, a very cool film about Apollo 13's mission to the moon. But very early on, they had a problem. Houston, we have a problem. You will probably recognize that catchphrase, Houston, we have a problem. It's a lesson in risk management. Soon after they took off, they had major problems. Their oxygen tank ruptured. It meant that they were really struggling and they had to shut off certain things. Now, they were in serious trouble. They could have turned back, but they wouldn't have made it back. Basically, there was very little chance of them making it back. But they had clear objectives initially. We are going to do this mission. What's amazing is that they were able to change their objectives very quickly. This is resilience and agility. This is an organization that understands risk. We know we need to change our objectives. We have to adjust based on scenarios. And guess what? They had trained for this. So their objectives changed to, we are going to bring our people back safely. What did that do? It immediately got everyone in America on board. So instead of looking at this as a failure, which it was, suddenly people were praying and hoping that we're going to get them back alive. We're rooting for you. We support you, NASA. So now they have the backing of the people, just simply by changing the narrative. They had been preparing for the unexpected. They're going up to space in a tin can. They know there's going to be some issues. So they train. They train very hard for years. They prepare. They have manuals. They look at every detail of that tin can that is up in space. They have a model on the ground as well, back on Earth. They have experts available. They have a second crew that don't make it up, that stay down. So just in case anything happens, we can replicate what's happening up there down on Earth. More importantly, they took risks. They knew that turning around would basically not be successful. So instead, they knew they had to go around the moon and use the moon's gravity to give them enough push to slingshot them back to Earth, using basically no energy whatsoever. Most likely, they could easily have gone off track and been sent out into space. But they had a strong leader who wanted to take risk, who knew what he had to do to take risk. They had experts on the ground who were looking at the risk, and they made those decisions based on risk. They had a risk-based decision making with a strong leader, and they turned risk to opportunity, and they came back safely. A lesson in risk management. And finally, we're going to talk about examples of startups thriving because of risk management. There's a few here. Uber, of course, is a good example. Cheaper, easier taxi service, app-based. This is an example of digital disruption in action. Uber are one of the largest taxi companies in the world, and they do not own a single taxi. Airbnb is one of the largest renters in the world. They do not own a single property other than their offices. This is the new reality. So Uber is a good example of doing this. They also look to increase security and driver requirements. Now, of course, Uber are also struggling now with certain risks such as regulation. Like I've mentioned previously, what are the risks to your company of regulation? Well, with Uber, taxi regulation, countries are realizing that their taxis and their taxi industry is at risk. So they're looking at putting stronger regulation for Uber. And this is a problem. But Uber basically was a startup and they've been a great success. The Body Shop, the founder's philosophy was to have a company that contributes to society, promoted ethical trading and no animal testing. It was hugely successful. It benefits to the customer, the social, the environmental, the beliefs, they were all promoted. And basically the Body Shop eventually was sold off when the founder fell ill for a lot of money. But the Body Shop was a startup that did really well. They looked at the risks. They looked at the environment. They knew that they were playing against some really big hitters, L'Oreal and all of these guys. But they took risk. They went into a market segment that they knew was new. They knew that they would be under a lot of pressure, but they took the right risk and they were successful. WeWork, founder originally selling baby clothes, but decided to make extra money by leasing out some of their office space. This is an example of risk management in action. They very quickly changed their business model when they realized selling baby clothes is okay, but it's not doing as well as I thought. And we see a new business model of co-working office spaces. They changed things around. Going back to Uber, they saw their opportunities in terms of risks that drivers and people had. If you ever used to take a taxi, people were worried about security. Who are these taxi drivers? Same with taxi drivers. Who are these people I'm picking up? Uber provided that extra security. They focused on risk management in order to drive sales. So you can see there's examples of startups thriving because of risk management. So that really leads us to why startups really could be finding risk management useful, why we should be looking at risk management as a startup, how it offers us competitive advantage, how it can help us be the Ferrari to win that race. I hope you found this section quite interesting, and we'll be back for another section next time. Thank you, everyone.